Imagine a world where death is not the end, where science can defy the gods and bring life back to the lifeless. But what price must be paid for playing God? Amid shadows, secrets, and obsessions, a story emerged from a nightmare that would forever shape our view of fear and creation. Today, we talk about Frankenstein, the work that confronts us with the dark side of science and the human soul. Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, is a novel written by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley and first published in 1818, when the author was just 20 years old. The first edition appeared anonymously, and it was not until the second edition in 1823 that Shelley's name appeared on the cover. The most widely read version today is usually the revised 1831 edition, in which Mary softened some passages and reinforced the moral character of the story. Considered one of the first works of modern science fiction, the novel also falls within the Gothic genre, with a dark atmosphere, philosophical reflections, and a scientific background that was disturbing at the time. The story began in the summer of 1816, known as the year without a summer, an unusually cold season caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora the previous year. Mary Shelley was then in Switzerland, staying with her fiancé Percy Bysshe Shelley at Villa Diodati, on the shores of Lake Geneva. They were accompanied by Lord Byron and John Polidori, Byron's personal physician. During a series of evenings spent discussing science, philosophy, and horror stories, Byron suggests that each of them invent a ghost story. Mary, after a sleepless night, had a vision or nightmare in which she saw a young scientist kneeling beside the figure he had assembled from human remains, watching as it began to move. From that image would emerge the idea for Frankenstein. The novel is narrated mainly by Robert Walton, an Arctic explorer who on his journey to the North Pole finds a dying man in the ice, Victor Frankenstein. Exhausted, Frankenstein recounts his life and his mistakes. From a young age, Victor had been obsessed with discovering the secret of life, studying natural science, anatomy, and forbidden techniques. He gathers fragments of human bodies and manages to animate them through a process that Mary Shelley does not describe in detail, leaving the reader free to imagine it. Electricity, associated with the research of his time, is a common conjecture but never explicitly mentioned in the text. Horrified by the result, Victor flees and abandons his creature. Meanwhile, the creature, which is never given a name in the novel, although the public associates it with Frankenstein, wanders alone, learning to observe, read, and speak. Its monstrous appearance provokes fear and rejection in everyone, although at first it has a kind nature. It learns French, reads Milton's Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Parallel Lives, and goads the sorrow of young Werther, and comes to reflect on the human condition, justice, and affection. However, constant humiliation and loneliness drive it to seek revenge against its creator, murdering his loved ones one by one. The final chase takes them both to the Arctic, where Victor dies and the creature, remorseful but determined to end his suffering, goes into the ice to die. Do you want more stories that bring the mystery back to life? Hit the like button and subscribe before this creature gets angry and starts looking for you. One of the most striking elements in the creation of Frankenstein is that Mary Shelley was inspired by scientific experiments that for the time border on the macabre. Among them were the works of Luigi Galvani and Giovanni Aldini, who researched electrical simulation in animal and human bodies. Aldini, Galvani's nephew, even went so far as to apply electricity to recent human corpses, causing muscle movements and facial expressions, which caused a mixture of amazement and horror among the public. These experiments in electrical resurrection were much discussed in scientific and literary circles, and it is almost certain that Mary Shelley knew these stories. In addition to science, the author drew on myths and legends about the creation of life. Among the most relevant is the figure of Prometheus in Greek mythology, who stole fire from the gods to give it to humans and was punished for his audacity. That is why the subtitle of the novel is The Modern Prometheus. It is also associated with the Jewish myth of the golem, a creature made of clay and animated through mystical rituals, which escapes the control of its creator. Both myths share the central theme of human ambition to challenge the limits imposed by nature or the divine. Mary Shelley was also familiar with the alchemical tradition, especially texts that spoke of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. Her character, Victor Frankenstein, has traits of a modern alchemist, combining mystical knowledge with scientific knowledge. Although the novel describes his method as more akin to chemistry and anatomy, the atmosphere of mystery and forbidden discovery clearly draws on the esoteric literature of previous centuries. Romanticism, the movement to which Mary Shelley belonged, exalted emotion, nature, and mystery, but also reflected on the place of human beings in the universe. The idea of a man trying to steal the secret of life fit perfectly into this intellectual climate. In addition, the philosophical debate about whether life has a divine origin or can be explained by natural laws was very much alive at the time, giving the story a backdrop of moral and scientific controversy. During the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the exhumation of corpses was a practice associated with both medicine and social mystery and fear. Modern anatomy was beginning to develop, and medical students and scientists needed to study human bodies to better understand physiology and practice dissections. However, demand far exceeded the legal supply of bodies, leading to the proliferation of resurrectionists or body snatchers, people who stole corpses from cemeteries to sell them to universities and scientists. This clandestine trade created a dark and disturbing atmosphere mixed with superstition, fear, and urban legends about desecrators and macabre rituals. The idea of manipulating death and the human body through scientific practices was confused in the popular mind with occultism and esotericism, which were experiencing a parallel boom. The Romantic era was marked by a growing fascination with the occult, the mystical, and the supernatural in reaction to Enlightenment rationalism. Esotericism, alchemy, and magical practices found a new audience among intellectuals and artists seeking answers beyond empirical science. Books on magic, astrology, spiritualism, and Hermetic philosophies circulated widely, and salons enthusiastically discussed these ideas. Mary Shelley and her contemporaries, such as Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, were in contact with these intellectual circles that blended science and mysticism. The line between scientific experimentation and esoteric rituals was often blurred. In fact, the use of electricity to reanimate corpses seemed like a modern form of magic, and the novel Frankenstein captures precisely that tension between scientific knowledge and the ancestral fear of the unknown. Although chemistry and physics were beginning to lay solid foundations for modern science, many scientists still sought explanations in ancient alchemical and hermetic knowledge. Victor Frankenstein embodies the character of the modern alchemist who attempts to master forces he does not yet fully understand, mixing esoteric and scientific knowledge, which adds to the atmosphere of mystery and danger in the novel. Drop your like if you want me to make a video about alchemy and its secrets eventually, or leave me your ideas in the comments about topics you want to see me draw. Frankenstein is not just a gothic horror story, it is also a deeply philosophical work that addresses questions about the limits of knowledge, the ethics of science, and the consequences of our actions. Victor Frankenstein embodies the archetype of the scientist who, blinded by ambition and the desire to transcend human boundaries, decided to play God by creating life from dead matter. This act raises the moral dilemma of whether everything that is scientifically possible should be done, or whether ethics should be the compass that guides research. Mary Shelley's novel is full of symbolism and messages that go beyond the superficial horror story, inviting the reader to reflect on the human condition and the paradoxes of creation. One of the most powerful symbols is the figure of Victor Frankenstein himself, who represents the human being who, in the quest for absolute knowledge and power, defies natural and divine limits. His excessive ambition can be interpreted as a warning about human arrogance, a call for humanity in the face of the mysteries of life and death. One of the central themes is responsibility for what we create. Victor, after bringing the creature to life, rejects and abandons it, creating an emotional void that will lead the monster to loneliness and ultimately revenge. The novel thus raises the question: is the creator morally responsible for the behavior of his creation, especially if it has been shaped by rejection and suffering? The creature symbolizes the other, the outcast, the marginalized because of his difference. Despite its monstrous appearance, it possesses sensitivity, intelligence, and a desire to belong, which calls into question ideas on monstrosity and humanity. Its constant rejection by society reflects themes of prejudice, discrimination, and the destructive effect of loneliness and hatred. In this sense, the creature acts as a mirror reflecting humanity itself, showing that evil is not innate, but rather a product of experience and environment. Despite its appearance, begins with a kind and curious nature, but discrimination and social isolation transform it. This reflects a moral dilemma about the influence of environment on character. Are we born good and society corrupts us? Or is there an intrinsic nature that determines our actions? Shelley seems to lean toward the idea that rejection and social injustice can deform even the noblest soul. The novel is permeated by the presence of nature, which not only acts as a backdrop but also reflects the emotional state of the characters. The grandiose and often hostile landscapes, such as the Swiss Alps or the Arctic, represent the immensity and indomitable power of nature in contrast to human fragility. This connection with the romantic sublime emphasizes the smallness of man and his limitations, in contrast to his ambition to transcend them. The story also warns about the side effects of innovation without prior reflection. Victor's drive to achieve scientific glory prevents him from foreseeing the suffering his discovery will cause, both to himself and to his loved ones. It is a reminder that human decisions, especially in the field of science, can have ramifications that go beyond what we imagine. Finally, the work can be interpreted as a social and moral critique that questions the ethics of scientific progress without humanity and collective responsibility towards the marginalized. Mary Shelley not only tells a horror story, but also raises relevant questions about how we build our societies and treat others, appealing to empathy and reflection. The novel has had an enormous cultural impact. The first film adaptation appeared in 1910, produced by Edison Studios. However, the most famous image of the monster comes from the 1931 film starring Boris Karloff, where he was given a flat head, screws in his neck, and a stiff gait, features that do not appear in the book. Since then, Frankenstein has inspired films, plays, comics, series, and parodies, becoming a modern myth. It has also been the subject of feminist interpretations, as it is considered a metaphor for motherhood and the creation of life outside the female body. Over time, Mary Shelley's story has not only endured as a horror classic, but also as a warning about the dangers of science devoid of conscience. Frankenstein is not just a horror story, but a profound warning about the limits of knowledge and the responsibility that comes with creating and transforming life. Mary Shelley invites us to question not only what we are capable of doing with science, but how our actions affect those around us and ourselves. In a world where technology is advancing by leaps and bounds, the story of Victor and his creature remains a disturbing mirror that reminds us that true power lies not only in creating, but in accepting the consequences with humanity, empathy, and ethics. Thus, Frankenstein remains relevant, a timeless classic that challenges us to reflect on human nature, loneliness, fear of the other, and the need for connection. Because behind the monster is a being who only wanted to be loved, and behind the creator, the shadow of an excessive ambition that ultimately destroyed him.